Hey, welcome back. In this second video where we talk more about the motherboard, I want you to keep one thing in mind. You got to have fun learning. So don't just get wrapped up in the words, in the concepts. Make this fun for yourself. Write down questions, write down goofy thoughts, goofy ideas. Make it fun because if not, you'll start to burn out on the material. Okay, so we're going to be finishing up this portion of the motherboard. We're going to talk about all of the components that you are responsible for understanding on the exam. So let's go ahead and quickly talk about this one key point. No matter the size, no matter the equipment, if it's something that interfaces, it has a motherboard. Okay, it has to have a motherboard because that's what all the components sit on. So you see a whole smattering of pictures here, and each one of those items has a motherboard. So let's talk a little bit about that one thing that's in common. We have that nervous system. Again, you could think of the body as your analogy. In this case, I am from now on, I'm going to stick to the city analogy. So let's think about it as a digital city. So the motherboard is that central hub where everything sits. It's distributing power and it's managing the data. So managing the commute of the data. Without the motherboard, without things connected to the motherboard, those components don't work. Okay. A couple of items that you'll see on the motherboard, and this is obviously not a true picture of a motherboard, but let's start here with the CPU. Let's consider that the mayor could be the brain, could be the CEO, but let's consider it the mayor for the digital city. On the CPU, you will oftentimes hear the reference to data cache or cache, spelled C-A-C-H-E. And this is rapid access storage. So the three terms you'll hear are L1, L2, L3. It sits the closest to the CPU, so the CPU is grabbing stuff from it all the time. RAM sits a little further away and it has higher capacity. So it's not as if CPU is not using RAM, but when it needs something lickety split, it literally goes to that L1, L2, or L3 cache. Speaking of RAM, we have our RAM. We consider it for this analogy high rises because it does sit perpendicular to the motherboard. It rises up. And if you look at a motherboard, you'll see those sticks of RAM sitting perpendicular or higher. Data pathways. So that's what we see here. All of this orange-ish illustration here, that is basically the pathway for the data to travel. So data between the CPU, between RAM, between the PCI Express, that's all being managed by your North Bridge, which I'll get to over here. But there are pathways on the motherboard. That's why it's called printed circuit board, because it has that pathway to deliver both electricity and data. Speaking of peripheral component, Internet Express, which you do not need to know that full name, we call it PCIe. Think about it as like a dock, like in major cities, Cleveland, Philadelphia, LA, New York City, there are docks. And down by the docks, there are people who are pulling stuff off of boats. So think of the PCIe as the express dock. Let me go over here real quick before I double back on this information. So you can also think of, the Port Authority. If we're thinking about docks, we're thinking Port Authority here is going to be literally the input-output ports. So that might be your HDMI, your USB, RJ45, your audio. It could include PS2 for any old devices, but that's what these back panel connectors are on a motherboard. And that's where you just plug things in from the outside. So let's circle back to the data traffic control. The bus system is what's managing the data flow. In fact, it's called a data bus. A data bus is where all the information is flowing from device to device. You'll hear referenced address bus as well. Don't worry about that right now. Think data bus. And the two items that are managing that data control are going to be your North Bridge and your South Bridge. I'll go a bit deeper into it when we get to another slide. But those are like the highway cops and then the local COPS or the crossing guards. Lastly, your system startup called your post and boot or post power on self test. That's basically when you press the power button to start your system, your CMOS is going to, the battery is holding that little charge. It's going to then prompt your CMOS chip to do a post. And then after the post, it's going to load the operating system into memory through the bootloader. And then the kernel initialization is where the OS, the operating system, takes control. So power button, power on self-test, to bootloader, to kernel initialization. We'll talk more about that in other videos. So a couple words you're going to hear throughout the material is going to be flash, firmware, embedded software. Here's a quick summary. Flash is like a USB. In fact, that's what a USB drive is. It is a chip that holds data. It is on a little silicon board, and anytime you plug it into the system, you can save information to the flash drive, and then you can pull it out, and that information stays there, even without electricity. It's what we call non-volatile. If I remove the electrical component, that information does not go away. Another way that we refer to flash is when we flash the BIOS. We flash the BIOS. So the BIOS is this, and that is the basic input-output system, and that's information that basically helps you regulate your system. Again, we'll talk more about that in a different video, but it is housed on firmware. So firmware is going to be a chip. It's an actual chip. It's not hardware, it's not software, that's why they call it firmware. And basically you can put embedded software onto that chip, and it lives there until you flash it, and you basically erase it and rewrite to it. So keep these three words in mind. They can get confusing, but if you think about it as flash, meaning I can erase something that's not usually erasable, on a permanent chip, which is going to be the firmware, the CMOS chip. Sometimes it's referred to as the BIOS chip, but it's the CMOS chip. And on that BIOS, on that CMOS chip is embedded software, and that's your BIOS. Okay. Let's head back for a second here to the chipsets. So think about the Northbridge as handling 3 items, and I think they're listed on this. Yeah, CPU, RAM, PCIe. So the Northbridge is handling all of the high-speed components. So if you think about, let's just take an analogy here. If you've ever been to New York City, it's in the northern part of the United States, then you know things are very fast there. Traffic isn't moving quickly because there's basically bumper-to-bumper traffic. But people are out on the sidewalks and they're walking from place to place. So it's a faster speed. The Northbridge handles those fast items. Now let's take this analogy and go down south, and let's sit on a nice porch on a hot summer day down in New Orleans. You're not going to be moving quickly because it's just too darn hot. It's too humid. So you're sitting there, maybe sipping a little tea, hoping for some air conditioning. So the South Bridge handles all of those slower components. If you use that analogy, you'll remember that the North Bridge is handling the fast stuff and the South Bridge is handling the slower stuff. And when I say slower, I mean mouse, keyboard, printers, audio, all of those other peripherals. North Bridge only handles 3. Memorize those 3, and you don't even have to worry about the rest. CPU, PCIe, RAM. This is a graphic showing you, and this is another graphic showing you. Okay, so let's move on to expansion slots. Expansion slots have 2 types. So we have the newer and we have the older. Think about expansion slots as empty lots, and they usually do stay empty on a motherboard. This is so that you can expand the functionality of your computer. This allows you to upgrade and make it faster, better, stronger without having to buy a completely new computer. So we've got the new components and we've got the old. PCIe is new, and legacy structures are PCI, drop the E, and AGP. AGP is an accelerated graphics port. This is what we use for old video cards. Retired, gone. PCI is used for general purpose expansion, retired, gone. Now, sometimes you will still see it built into the motherboard. That's because if you want to attach a legacy device, you have that capability. But for the most part, they're pretty much gone at this point. So here's what the PCIe is handling. This is the newer one. This is the modern standard. Handling graphics cards or GPUs, which are typically used for gaming. And this is what they typically look like. They have strong fan action, and they have a bunch of ports here on the back. PCIe is also handling NIC cards. So this is for Wi-Fi. Network interface card is what NIC stands for. And then also handling NVMe storage. Okay. So moving on to the filing system. So when we have hard drive storage, we have two ways of connecting our storage, and we connect it to what's called a controller. If you don't know what that looks like, look it up. It's basically a little slot that sits on the motherboard for me to plug the cable into. So we've got two types of storage cables. We've got SATA, and that is more current, more standard. And then we've got PATA, and that is a legacy. SATA is faster, it has better airflow, because look, this is a really thin cable versus this big fat cable. That blocks the airflow, and also that storage controller or connector is a lot slower. When we store things, we store them in bits, bytes, kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, or petabytes. So you can see each one, it gets larger and larger. We're not going to do the math conversion, but we'll go over that in another video. Just know your storage capacities in order from bit to petabyte. And this is usually where we hang out a lot nowadays. We hang out in the mega, giga, and terabytes. So just know those in order. And again, this is another picture of why we use SATA nowadays, because this is a fatter cable blocking the airflow. Legacy that has slower transfer speeds. SATA is modern, fast, clean, easier to plug in, and it's typically used for our standard hard disk drives and solid state drives. So right there is the controller right here. I'm plugged into it, and the information, when I go to save it, it's saved to my hard drive, which you can think of as a filing cabinet. The controller is kind of like the go-between. It's getting the information, cables, shooting it up to the hard drive, and everything is being saved in the hard drive. Now, I have two more things to go over here, or really one more, and then that's the chain of command. We get a little confused about this, so let me explain this in the most simplified way. The CMOS battery, it's basically a watch battery. You can buy it at any drugstore. That CMOS battery provides a low trickle of power, and it keeps that low trickle of power going to the particular component on the motherboard that it needs to go to, so that you keep your settings alive. If you didn't have the CMOS battery, when you hit the power button on your computer, everything would get lost. Your CMOS keeps that low trickle, and then when you hit the power button, it sparks and goes to the CMOS chip. Right here's your CMOS chip, which holds the time, date, and boot order. So again, if that battery dies, you don't have this information moving to the next phase. It dies. And then usually you'll know that your CMOS battery is dying because time resets, the date resets. That's usually an indicator before everything just goes blank. And usually you replace the CMOS battery. So CMOS battery goes to CMOS chip. Again, it is oftentimes referred to as the BIOS chip. It is actually the CMOS chip. That CMOS chip is now going to say, okay, hey, BIOS, I'm going to ship you the information you need to get started. And the BIOS is like the manager. So it's waking everything up. It's doing a power on self test. And it's like, hey, hard drive, are you working? Yes, I'm good. Hey, RAM, are you working? I'm good, boss. Let's go. Hey, CPU, are you working? We're good over here. So that's what the process looks like for the post-test. It checks a little over 15 plus items to make sure the system is a go so that you can actually use the computer. You'll know if it's not working during a post-test because you'll get beeps. The beeps indicate what is wrong, and you usually have to go look those beeps up if you don't have them memorized. So it'll be like beep, 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 or some other configuration of beep. Once everything checks out, your bootloader takes over and it says, we're going to load the operating system. Kernelization occurs and the operating system loads. Okay, so that is the chain of command. Now, on the exam objectives, you do need to know back panel and front panel. So here's a quick peek at back panel, front panel. Ethernet RJ45s, audio, USB, HDMI, some other legacy devices like a PS2 might be on the back here. We'll go into that in another video. On the front panel are going to be these connections, and they're usually connected via wires. So if you build a computer, you have to put these tiny little connectors into the motherboard so that the electricity is going to these devices, including the power button, the USB ports, and some other items. So that's everything. I appreciate your time. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. I'm here to answer them. Put them in the comments and we'll start a discussion. All right, I'll see you in the next video.